computer. Okay. Okay. So hi. Welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for coming on this occasional series for my YouTube channel, Talking Therapy. And I mean, as usual, I just love to start by saying hello and welcome, and also just inviting you just to share whatever you feel to about how you ended up being a therapist working with bioenergetics.
Oh, okay. Do you go by Dev or Devaraj or
Either is fine. Dev is fine.
Dev is fine? Okay, Dev's easier to say. Um, well, Dev, the way I became a bioenergetic therapist was actually kind of interesting. Um, a friend of mine was a client of a bioenergetic therapist, and he said, "Oh, there's this event where we can go and you can get free continuing ed credits." I said, "Oh, great. What is it?" He goes, "Oh, it's this thing called bioenergetics." I said, "Well, what is it?" He goes, "Oh, well, let's just go and find out." So I knew nothing about it. It was his idea, and I went and I saw some of the therapists do demonstrations with, volunteers, and I was just blown away. I thought, this is really great. Um, I have taken yoga teacher training and practiced yoga for about 40 years. And I was always looking for something that put the mind and the body together as a therapist, but I'd never really seen anything. And when I watched the demonstration, I said, uh, I want to do this. And my intuition said, yeah, sign up, like sign up now. And so I found out there was a training class starting in like a month. And you're supposed to have bioenergetic therapy before you start. And so I said, well, I really would like to do this. And they said, well, you'll have to get a couple therapy sessions in really fast. And so I did. And that was 15, 16, 17 years ago. Um, and it's terrific work. Are you a bioenergetic therapist, Dev?
I mean, I kind of call myself that, but I never trained with the IIBA or anything like that. I originally trained in group therapy with
Ah,
a Dutch school, and then I
ah,
kind of it was more screaming and shouting group work, very intense kind of primal encounter groups and this kind of thing. And
that's
then
right.
and then I lived in a community, spiritual community for a long time, and then
Ah,
I was working there. And then at some point, I kind of got more and more interested in bio, which I'd done quite a bit of when I was training, and I just I felt confident with the group room anyway, so I just started to learn some bioenergetics, but I never really formally trained. Mm.
ah. How did you start this these interviews? How did that happen? I'm so curious.
Well, it was only a few months ago, but I
Hmm.
was there was another guy who was quite into Reichian work, and he was, I can't remember, there was a chap, forgotten his name now, but Garrett Dawn, this chap was, and I was
Hmm.
just on his YouTube channel leaving a couple of comments, nothing hostile or anything, and then we were rapping a little bit, and some other guy came in and said, hey, you two guys should do an interview. So we sort of both said, yeah, why not, and so I did an interview with him and put it up, and people enjoyed it. And then I did one with a couple of other. I did one with a guy from. Oh God, my memory's so bad these days. But Nick Farcher from one of the big kind of esoteric book publishing companies.
Ah,
I did another one with a chap in Seattle who's a bioenergetic therapist, and then I did one with Stephen Kessler, who's like who wrote this. I mean, he's not so much pure bioenergetics, but he's very into Reichian character structure.
right.
And so they were all successful, and then I was just chasing around for someone else who maybe I'd do another one with.
Well, I'm happy to be on your list. Yeah, yeah. I want to do a little shout out to the two people who were the people that demonstrated the very first bioenergetic therapists I ever saw, Diana Guest
Mhm.
and Garrett Bedrosian. And they were both so good and so skillful that I thought, I want to do that. And they were the ones who really helped me sign up because, it didn't look like I'd be able to get into that training class because there was
Mm.
such a short. And they were like, "Oh no, we'll help you. You'll find a way. We'll get you in. We'll encourage you to expedite the process." So I always have to give credit to them. Without them, I wouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm. 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 Well, there's always these kind of, I don't know, moments of realization, aren't there, suddenly or something? I've had a few just internally when it's like,
Yeah,
actually, I want to go in this direction or something, and it's just kind of clear.
yeah.
Because it's so nourishing working with people as well. Did you find that?
Oh, yeah. Um, when I was a kid, little kid, adults would just stop and tell me their problems. They just they just would confide in me, even when I was like 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. And I thought, well, that's kind of weird. And like, why are people telling me their secrets? And so when I got older, I thought, well, maybe the universe is telling me that I should become a therapist. Um, so when I went to University of Cincinnati in 1971, they were developing a student-run counseling program where they were training us students to be volunteer counselors. And I signed up for it. And 71, that was what, 50 years ago. Is
Mm.
that right? Oh my God, it
Wow.
is. 50 years ago, I had my first training as a therapist, and I just really loved it. I just thought, yeah, I can use this gift that the universe has given me, that people feel safe talking with me, that they trust me, for whatever reason, um, and help other people. And for me, Dev, I don't know about you, but this work helps me. As I'm helping other people, I'm helping myself. I'm learning about myself.
Mm.
I'm addressing my own fears and blockages and
Mm.
stumbling blocks. Diana Guest once was my supervisor, and I said, Diana, I'm having the same problems as these clients. And she said, as long as you're one step ahead of them, you'll be okay. And I remember this one client, I thought, oh my God, my mother's like that too. So I thought, okay, I just need to be one step ahead of the clients
Mhm. Mhm.
and get good supervision,
Mm. Mm.
which supervision has been critical for me as a
Mhm.
bioenergetic therapist, just to,
Mhm.
yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess I've noticed that like the kind of issues that I've had and I've worked through at least to some degree, that people come towards me. Like I was an adopted kid, I had quite a harsh childhood, and I was mixed race as well, brought up in white family,
Uh,
and then I find like other people I don't know, they don't know I'm adopted. I don't broadcast it on my website, but if I was to look at the number of people that come to me with who are adopted, it's much higher than the number of adopted people in the outside world or who normally attend therapy. It's like there definitely is some kind of energetic attraction that
yep.
pulls certain kinds of people in. I guess perhaps they can recognize maybe you made a little bit of progress through some issue, but I
Yeah.
do really resonate with this idea that you're also kind of, I'm always working on myself as well, and
Yes. 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 Yes.
it's like part of it, it's like I did train in group therapy, and a part of that is often with intense process work, you really have to be the authority figure for the group because they have to feel that you're holding the space in a proper way. You can't always be super democratic. There is a case that you have to really be a bit of a boss, but then the danger is that you keep on doing that outside the group room or in the kind of downtime meals or whatever with the class and it is very important I've found to also just really be a friend as well and know the boundaries but also just to have that basic to show your basic humanity like and not to just hide in a kind of boss thing that you may need to do at certain times and
Yeah.
also now that I'm kind of outside of community, I'm not running so many groups because of COVID and whatever, and I'm doing more stuff like one-to-ones, which I never, they're quite new for me to do one-to-ones. So I'm still learning a lot from
Uh-huh.
that. And I'm also creating online content like courses and stuff, which I've learned to do. And that also means I can really step down from this whole kind of boss thing and group leader thing and just really do the work myself. And it's very, very good for me. I still consider that I have a lot of stuff that I'm carrying around from my early childhood, that I need to keep progressively working on and see other therapists for work and whatever, to get sessions.
Yeah, don't we all?
Mm,
I
mm.
remember my ex-partner used to say, we would have these discussions and he would say, "Oh, don't use that therapist voice with me." And I would just feel myself go into the like, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you feel that way." And he's like, "Don't use that therapist voice with me." I'm like, "Okay, I'm sorry. I'll try to snap out of it." I guess it was my default when I was like not sure what to say or felt attacked or something. I would go into my therapy voice. Anyway,
Yeah,
he
yeah,
called me on
yeah.
it. He was good. He called me on it.
Well, that's great. I mean, I do think in relationships, I have therapist friends who are like in relationships, and they always seem to be therapizing each other a bit, and talking about this is what happens from your mother, blah blah, and whatever. And I don't know. I don't think it's a good road to go down, really, personally. But I mean, like, I think it's just a chance to just be completely real in the moment as a person when you're in a relationship, really.
Yeah. Well, we therapists all have our own problems, don't we? None of us is that evolved that we don't get triggered, we don't get stuck, you know. Uh, our character structure, we might be able to work with it quite a bit, but I'm still an oral, I still have oral tendencies and
Yeah.
I watch them and I'm like, oh, here we go. Okay, well, maybe I could work with this a little bit. Uh, so yeah, I don't think the work ever ends, which is kind of great because God willing, until our last, day, we'll be growing, we'll be changing, we'll be learning new stuff. I mean,
Mm,
I always want to keep going to trainings because even though I just turned 68, I'd like to keep practicing maybe 20 more years or
mm,
so.
mm,
I don't know. We'll see what the universe has in mind, but I
mm,
don't want to say, oh, that's it. I've learned enough. Now I'm just going to coast. And
mm.
that would be just so boring, I think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So how do you mostly work one-to-one with clients or like seeing people, or what's your kind of, do you have a preferred like way of working with people, or?
Well, at the moment, Dev, I'm using, Zoom or FaceTime or something. Um, I'm thinking of going back into an office, in a month or two. Um, I see most of my clients are individual. I'd say about a third are couples. About half are LGBTQ and about half are heterosexual.
Hmm.
Um, it's a really wide age range. I see quite a few young men in their 20s who are just really lost.
Hmm.
Um, and not just LGBTQ. A lot of young straight guys, they'll
Hmm.
say, my girlfriend wants me to be sensitive, but then when I am, she says I'm a wimp, and I mean, it's a challenging time to be a man.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, well, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You're too sensitive. You're not sensitive enough. You're not really being a man. You're not really being a leader. You're not taking care of our family. Oh, you're too macho. Oh, you're too bossy. And, these young guys are just pretty tripped out.
Mm,
So, they come in and they don't care that I'm gay.
mm,
Um, and what I notice now as an elder in the world at 68 is these young guys come in and they haven't really grown up. They're still sort of acting like little boys, you know? And so one thing I've found myself saying a lot is, it sounds like you haven't really grown up. And they'll get kind of offended or something, and I'll say, "Would you like to?" And they'll almost always say, "I would, Dev, but I don't know how." And I say, "Well, let me help you. Let
mm,
me help you figure out how you
mm,
want to grow up."
mm,
And some of those clients, former clients, I still hear from them. They still send me pictures of their wives and their babies and their husbands, uh, and they say, thank you for helping me grow up. I just didn't know how to do it. So for me as a male, it seems like a really good time to offer to younger men a sort of mentoring, uh, role, if
Mm,
that's helpful to them.
mm, mm. Yeah. I mean, I'm a little bit younger, but I had the same feeling come on around. I'm 60 now, and I had the same
Huh,
feeling come on around the age of 55. I mean, I was, I think, from my traumatized background, very dopamine driven, competitive kind of side, and then so it was quite strange for me to suddenly think I really want to support younger guys or younger people to step, also younger women, to like in the 20s and 30s, to step up and be in their power. Men who are kind of lost in this pleasing kind of thing, and
yeah,
who've never really had like a role model in some way, because I think men seem to need that a little bit more than women, young men more than young women. I don't know if that's true. It seems like that. And women, of course, who so many women have been brought up in a culture where they're just not really allowed to say no, or be in their power in any way. They're just kind of, the whole culture is kind of programmed or semi-programmed them for some basic level of subservience, and
yeah.
and
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 people pleasing, like you said. I don't know. A lot of us in the LGBT community have been trained to be people pleasing too.
mhm,
We come from the one down position, like that book, The Best Little Boy in the World. Well, we're LGBTQ, so we have to try harder because we're not as good as you straight people.
really.
Oh, yeah. So we have to achieve more, we have to look better, we have to be smarter, we have to be more successful, we have to have nicer cars and nicer clothes because we're not as good as you straight people. At least that's how we've been trained. I know I was sure raised that way. Um, and so we're always trying to please straight people. Like, look, are we good enough? Are we as good as you? Do you like us? Are we still deviants? Are we still weirdos? Do we still make you uncomfortable? Now that we can get married, is that okay with you?
Mm,
It's interesting coming from a sexual minority position, not
mhm,
an ethnic minority position.
mhm. Yeah, wow. Do you think that's mostly because of the level of prejudice that's been kind of institutionalized against sexual minorities and gay people in the past in the West, or
I
all over?
do.
Really? Yeah.
And something I thought was unusual, Dev, was years ago I realized, if you're African American, your parents are probably African American. If you're Jewish, your parents are probably Jewish. Um, but if you're gay or lesbian, if you're LGBTQ, probably your parents are not.
Mm,
So we're one of the few minorities that were raised by people that have no idea what's going on with us and how to help us grow up. You know,
mm,
my African American friends said, "Yeah, you always have the talk with your kids when they're teenagers about what they have to look out for." And my friends that are Jewish say, "Yeah, we talk to our kids about being Jewish." But if you grow up LGBTQ, your parents don't want to talk to you about this, and they don't even know what to say.
mm,
So we're this minority that was raised by parents that were not the same minority that we are in 99% of the cases.
mhm,
So our upbringing is not very grounded in anything that's very solid or loving or understood or empathized with. It's a strange position to be in.
mm. I never thought about it like that before. Yeah, it's totally true.
Well, it's just different, huh?
Mm, mm,
So if your parents have no idea, like mine had no idea, like who I was and why did I like boys, and it was just really like, oh, don't do that. Oh, don't be that way. Oh, that's really a deviant. Oh, you don't want to be unhappy. Oh, don't grow up to be a sick, twisted person. You know, be this other kind of person that everybody will like. Look straight, act straight, go out with girls.
mm,
Um, which, if that's not who you are, it's just a killer for your
mm,
self image. Like you're not okay the way you are. But if you act this way, we'll accept you.
mm, yeah.
So it's a interesting burden to, and as a therapist, it's interesting to help clients with that one
Mm,
because I've had a client more than once tell me, you're like my good dad. You're like the dad I wish I had,
mm,
who would kick my butt when I was lazy, but also loved me and supported me in becoming the person I want to be,
mm,
not the person that you think I should be.
mhm,
So
mhm,
I love being a therapist. That's why I don't want to retire. God willing, I'll be able to work, a long time. I just I find it so nurturing for me to do this work, Dev. How about you?
mhm. It's yes, it is to do it and to work with people. And sometimes, I've lost track of that people have been moved in a workshop or whatever, and then
Mm,
I'm on Facebook or something, and there's just you get a lot of, I don't know, positivity suddenly, or people suddenly remember, and you think, yeah, wow, I did that, I
yeah,
kind of like a,
yeah,
I helped that person in that
yes,
in that space move through something, and
yes,
there is this sense, when I was younger, I was very, very dysfunctional younger, but I dreamed of being more rigid and having more money and power and things like this. And I was way too oral and dissociated to really do that. But that was my kind of ideal, so to speak. But when I started to do a lot of therapy, just to, not because I had any ambitions to be a therapist, but just to try and get, my needs met, basically
yes.
as a social human being, basically, and so
Amen
um,
to that. Yes.
and then at some point, I was given feedback. You could be a therapist or something. Maybe 8, 10 years into to doing work on myself, and I did find it like just it was another dimension somewhere. Apart from the kind of the rigid vision of success with the good spouse and the house and car and money and all of this kind of thing, or the
Yeah.
male predator out there doing the thing in the world, doing his thing in the world. Also, this idea of just really helping people and being holding space and facilitating people to develop and move through blocks, was also
Mm,
had a new dimension to me in value. I hadn't placed something like that in my own internal schema of value before until I started to experience it.
uh, yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I don't think I ever would have become a therapist had I not
yeah,
been a client first, and
yeah.
just found that so many. I think over the years, I probably had 7 or 8 different therapists since I was a kid,
Mm-hmm,
and everybody gave me a different gift. I mean, each therapist had something different to offer,
mm-hmm.
his or her own way of being in the world. And from each one, I just learned something different. Uh, and my therapist retired a couple years ago. My energetic therapist retired. And I was like, oh no, now what? You know? So I went about a year without therapy thinking, okay. And then my little sister died, and it really threw me for a loop, and I really wanted to get some support. Um, so I found a new therapist, and I'm learning new things from him. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's definitely it's a powerful profession, and it's kind of hard often to easily communicate that to people. It's hard until you've kind of been there, I think, to realize the value of it.
yeah, yeah. I've been studying internal family systems. Dev, I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I don't know much about it. I've heard of it from a couple of people.
It's such a great combination with bioenergetics. Um, it like bioenergetics, it really honors the mind-body connection, and I find it makes me a better bioenergetic therapist because it gives me it's sort of the parts work, and it gives me another way of looking at the way somebody thinks. And then bioenergetics gives me this framework of looking at things through the body. I remember Diana Guest, as you can tell, she's been a mentor to me for
Mm,
many years.
mm,
She said, bioenergetics is just how I think, it's just how I look at people. And I think that was really insightful because when I'm working with clients, I'll just notice, oh, they're not breathing.
mm,
Oh, look at their skin tone. Oh, this week they're paler, or oh, they've got a bit of a rash on their neck,
mm,
or even on, a video, it's like, oh, they seem to be sitting differently. They seem to be leaning forward. Oh, look how their one shoulder is kind of higher.
mm,
Oh, look how they're blinking. Look how much they're blinking. And that's all from the bioenergetic training that told me to look at the body, look at the
mm,
body.
mm,
And so I bring that to the internal family systems work, and it's like this really great combination. I'm so grateful that I've been trained in both of them.
mm, mm,
Um, I just feel very, very fortunate to have these two modalities that work together so beautifully
mhm,
to help people.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's in the UK, it's actually quite, there's a lot of psychotherapy, and we're very, in many ways, Britain became a very powerful country through its minds,
Yes.
through inventing stuff and the Industrial Revolution and kind of charging around the world, creating an empire and this kind of thing a couple of hundred years ago. And but there's very, very little to do with the body. You literally cannot really train in it. There's a little bit of one or two places, but on the edge. But like, it's
Oh,
very hard to really train in anything really to do with the body. As a therapeutic, as part of psychology.
wow.
It's like this kind of, it's completely off on the side. And I didn't come through mainstream psychotherapy either. I came through the Osho scene, basically. I mean, I was doing regular,
Oh,
I was
yeah.
actually,
So, yeah, yeah.
yeah, the Indian mystic guy, and not so
Yes.
much that
Yes.
I was attached to him personally, because I didn't get into it till about a decade after he passed away anyway. But he kind of created a space where a lot of therapists, radical therapists, came together. And then a lot of, so you had a lot of European therapists, a lot of West Coast American therapists and East Coast American therapists all kind of came together, and a lot of new techniques kind of emerged out of that whole kind of scene.
Wow.
And it was a big melting pot as I see it. And so there was still a lot of therapists around about 2000 when I started to work on myself, late 90s and 2000. And I'd done some regular kind of group work with someone, but it was just a bit too, I figured I was too case hardened. I was very, very traumatized. I'd come
Wow.
through a lot of damage, and was very strong in oral, rigid, and dissociating, schizoid. And
Mm.
I mean, I didn't know any of that then, but I just recognized myself as totally armored. And I just thought it's going to take too long working with this regular kind of psychotherapist who was also doing some bio. And he was a good guy. And I met some much more interesting people going to his groups. But in the end, I ended up with some of the Osho people, the sannyasins, because it was just, I mean, they were really on fire. They were like, if you want to be part of our gang, you need to do a lot of groups. It's not like you can, so there was this whole social pressure thing going on around it as well. And,
Wow.
you had to sign up for these really intense processes. And that worked for me. That worked for me. I can't quite remember where I was going with this now, but
Body work in England,
yeah,
therapy in England,
yeah. So that's
not
where I came exactly.
terribly
Yeah,
connected to the body.
yeah. So I came up through the kind of underground, the kind of subcultural scene, and then and I still don't really have any proper qualifications as a therapist. I mean, not that one that's recognised by, I've got one that's recognised by insurance companies in the UK, which is obviously necessary, and a little bit diploma in anger management or something like that. But aside of that, I'm not really in the mainstream, and there is not really the mainstream is just, for me, it's just a bit too much, the mind. It's always going to the mind. And I've been more interested really in the belly connection and things like that, and I mean the heart connection as well, because the sannyasins are always, the Osho people are always into the heart. but also the belly connection and this. So that's been my own kind of journey, and now some people are training with me, which is cool, but and quite a lot of other therapists join my stuff because they just want to learn just some body-based techniques to integrate with their own practice, but there's a massive gap, in the UK. In Germany it's not so bad, and some parts of Europe there's quite a lot of body-based stuff and it's treated with respect, but certainly what I do would certainly be treated by the kind of a lot of the therapeutic mainstream would poo-poo it completely, or
Uh,
just kind of how it goes.
uh, somebody asked me the other day, so how is it doing therapy through a video screen? And how can you do bioenergetic therapy through a video screen? Like, don't you have to see the whole body and don't you have to touch the client? And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, that's helpful. But one thing I learned from bioenergetics is how to resonate with the client and how to pick up their sort of resonance, their energy. This sounds a little woo-woo. I'm not explaining it that well. But I took a professional development workshop um, through bioenergetics, and it was about, I think it was called emotional resonance, something resonance, using bioenergetics to resonate with your client and figure out what's going on with them just by this sort of energetic experience that you have of them. And Dev, I use it every single day now that we're doing Zoom sessions
Mm-hmm.
because, I can only see like this much of you, right? And I can't, you know, go with you. I can't put my feet on your feet to help you ground, you know. But what I can do from bioenergetics is I can really get a sense of where you're at, looking at you on the screen, just like, where is this guy? What's his energetic level? What's his vibrational level? And sometimes I'll feel like, some sensation in my body. And I know it's not projective identification. Thank you, Sigmund Freud. Um, I'll feel it and I'll ask the client, I'll say, I'm feeling this really strong sensation in my chest or in my gut or behind my eyes or in my jaw. And they'll say, oh yeah, I'm feeling that too.
Mm.
I'm wondering, I'm wondering what that is. And they're like, I don't know. And then we explore it. And so without bioenergetics, this kind of Zoom therapy to me would be so much more primitive
Mm.
because I would have lost so many ways of knowing where my client was at. But because of this emotional resonance that I learned from bioenergetic trainers, this was a bioenergetic workshop,
Mm.
I feel I can do really good work on Zoom in a way that if I hadn't had bioenergetics, I wouldn't I wouldn't be able to do that.
Mm. Mm.
So when I was thinking about our interview, I wanted to throw that out because I've never heard anybody say that bioenergetics helped them to do kind of Zoom therapy. But boy, it sure has helped me
Mm-hmm.
tremendously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Anyway,
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, well, there's also like a kind of, I guess I get a kind of, there's a couple of things I get, like a kind of gut connection, if I
yes,
tune at a belly level to someone,
yes.
feel someone or whatever. Or, I mean, and on the opposite end of the scale, when I was running a lot of workshops and a lot of groups, you got 30 people in the group room for a couple of days, very, very common to find like a sudden stream of kind of intuitive logic or reasoning or words coming in from some kind of channel, like look at that person, what are they up to, confront whatever, or something like this, like quite, or with long sharings that you're doing for a few hours with a whole group, feeling like this person really needs to be focused on, or pick that point up, or really let that one go, and this kind of thing, quite strong intuitive guidance, which was this kind of other end of the chakra scale from the gut. But I mean, I've certainly experienced both of those, and they just kind of they don't, I don't get it usually, like just walking around town or doing stuff. I don't get that at all. But if I'm in the
Right,
group
right.
room, then some channel is open a little bit, and it's like, well, look at that guy, how he's doing that. You should pick that up or whatever. It's like
Hmm.
It's interesting, it's interesting. I mean, there's a
There's
lot of.
so many ways. There's so many ways of knowing things. That's what I hear you saying, like through the belly and through the gut. And it's like there's no limit to the way we can have information about ourselves and other people.
Mhm.
It's not limited to bioenergetics, internal family systems, psychoanalysis, spirituality, religion, yoga. It's like there's just so many ways to know something and to receive information about people. The older I get, the more I just say, I'm really open to knowing things that I don't necessarily I can't prove.
Mm. Mhm.
And the universe will just give me information and it turns out to be really helpful to the clients. And I just say thank you. I just try to get out of the way and let the universal wisdom, intelligence, call it God, whatever, come through.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Let the little me get out of the way so the big me um, can actually be more present.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating kind of business, because it's like, especially working a little bit or coming a little bit from a sort of spiritual alternative scene, it's like there's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
so many different takes and directions and everything, and it's incredible stuff. I
I
mean,
love how spirituality and psychology really overlap so much.
mhm,
Sometimes clients seem to be at the point where what they really need now is a spiritual path.
mhm,
Psychologically, they've sort of worked through most of their stuff.
mhm,
And so I'll give them referrals to, spiritual books or workshops or meditations.
mhm,
And I'll say, this seems like your next step. And for some of them, it really is. And I don't see them again, but I might hear from them saying, thank you for turning me on to Jack Cornfield or Theravadan Buddhism or Iyengar Yoga or Osho. Is it
mhm.
Osho? Osho.
Yeah.
Um, or, Nityananda or, any of these other spiritual teachers that are just really wise beings that have another level of information to give us if we
Mm,
want it.
mm.
If we're ready, if we're open, are we open?
Well, it's kind of, I mean, there's such a like big perspective, for a because I was very strongly for a while in the alternative scene
Yeah.
and the whole Osho scene and stuff. And I mean, also when I started to really study characterology a bit about 2 or 3 years ago and really got into it, and when I get into it, I kind of hurl myself into it. I've got that all kind of addictive trait like that.
Ah,
And something I noticed from the scene I was in was like, whoa, I'm surrounded by orals. I'm surrounded by orals. So many people who are spiritual seekers have also got, quite a strong lack of merging somewhere with the mother in the first year of life. There was too much of a rapid disconnection, more than their genes kind of were expecting. And it's left them with this inner sense of lack that
yep.
they're trying to fill up with spiritual practice or trying to merge in some way, And that was a really big realization for me, because I'd kind of
Mm.
previously seen all spiritual seekers as a kind of a bit above an average 9 to 5 kind of working mass of humanity or something. And suddenly that was like that subtle kind of hierarchy that I've made in my own mind was kind of thrown a bit around, and somewhere at the end of that, I ended up moving out of spiritual community and actually coming back in the other direction, more to like just normal city life, after 17 years. But I'm still fascinated by, I'm still intrigued by the spiritual stuff, but it's like there is no way for my mind to really get a proper grasp on things. What I've seen is like from studying character structure is like, Britain, kind of the conditions of the infancy, like 200 years ago, created a lot of kind of rigid and dissociated people, and also orals and endurers, and you know, British culture was became dominant because of that. Because of that. That's the prime motivation.
Well, the whole Victorian age, right? That rigidity, that properness, that
Yeah.
hide. hide any sort of body sexuality, sensuality. Yeah, just hide it and just, you know, conquer the world and more colonies and more
Mm.
money and, just
Yeah,
go out there and make the world British. And
yeah.
you all were so good at that for so many years.
Well, yeah, and then and also the level of inventiveness that the British had
Yes.
probably also relates to some level of dissociation, to a feeling of unsafety in early in life. In that, not solely that, of course, there's science and there's rationality in these kinds of things, but this heavily reliance on a kind of mental framework and ability to work with a mind like this
Huh.
probably also ended up in a lot of inventions, and which were very and you
Interesting.
know
I never thought of that. Hmm.
yeah, and in a sense, when I moved a little bit further down this line, so America was almost like Britain 2.0, in that, you know, it was quite clear that the level of repression in British culture was so strong in the childhood, you really
Yes.
created a mass of just messed up people, really. And in America, they wanted to keep the rigidity there, but take away some of the early pre-egoic traits a little bit, so that people really could move forwards and have some kind of aggression. It's a little bit, I don't know, but that's a little bit how I see the culture. And
Hmm.
so with the sort of the enduring side and the oral side and the dissociating, they're so ego kind of destructive or ego diminishing. It's kind of hard for the individual to just feel the energy. Hey, I have a right to go out into the world and have a life. And so they kind of dialed down on those a little bit somewhere in American culture 100 years ago, but dialed up on the later kind of rigidity a little bit later in childhood, or the movements towards aggressive personalities, or what we'll call
Yes.
psychopathic, and that kind of thing. So I was, and then on an even deeper level, coming away from Osho, it was like, and that's the main driver behind Western civilization. So it was like, whereas previous I had this kind of hierarchy, that we should be a bit like Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, moving towards spirituality. It was a bit like, oh, but we've only managed to really create civilization and all the good things, compared to like the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages, actually through a lot of traumatization. Actually, it was kind of it was a bizarre kind of realization, whereas previously all the kind of social theorizing was about de-traumatizing childhood, understandably, and creating more healthy and emotionally healthy human beings. And I saw the other side. I saw the other side, that perhaps without the trauma, we would never really have moved on from the kind of Middle Ages. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's totally true, but
How do you how do
yeah.
you see bioenergetics fitting into that, Dev? That's a really interesting summary that you have of sort of the sociological point of view of the States and Britain. How could bioenergetics be helpful in that sort of situation? I'm really curious.
Mm. I mean, I think the challenge is to say, it's easy to say the culture is wrong and we need to change it. But the first thing is like, who am I? Can I face myself and change it? And, particularly take out some of those early egoic woundings, the sense of lack from the oral, the sense of fear from the dissociating schizoid, and the sort of repressed anger of the endurer, to work on those with the bio or Reichian techniques,
Hmm.
and get the drive back, the healthy drive back, so the person can move forwards. Uh, because I mean, all the clients I see and have, and people that come to groups, the overwhelming majority are deficient in one of the first three. The rest of the people are mostly not going for therapy. They might need it, but they're not going to bother. So
Right. They
so it's
present
like
much. They present more higher functioning.
they're
They
more higher
present that
functioning
way.
neurotic. They're not low functioning neurotic, whatever. But but the thing is like, so it's like seeing the gift of the trauma. That's what bioenergetic offers. Because I think, if I hadn't
Gift
had
of the
such,
trauma. The gift
yeah,
of the trauma. Hmm.
because if I hadn't had such a traumatized childhood, probably by now I'd probably have like 2.4 kids, be living in some hideous little town outside London with in a relationship I'm utterly bored with, and just waiting to get cancer or something. I don't know, that's kind of negative, but because I had so much trauma, because, you know,
It's quite a projection, Dev.
well, that's how my mind kind of looks at it, because
Yeah.
I'm not someone who by nature will look deeply at myself unless I'm really dragged right to the edge, somewhere. And my life was so dysfunctional, when I was doing a lot of therapy, we talk about, love relationships, friendships, and work. And if you're kind of happy and authentic in those areas, then you'll probably be quite happy. Basically, a sort of tenet of social therapy, and I was utterly unhappy in all three of those areas, and
Oh,
in a
okay.
total fucking mess, basically. So it was only that and the realization of that led me to really take enough risk to go to very intense therapy groups, and sign up for things. Otherwise, I would have just taken the easy way out all of the time. I would not have, as I see my own personality.
I like your point about trauma being sort of a catalyst for change and growth.
Mm,
You know, it's I don't know. I think if I was raised in a really happy, easy, well-adjusted childhood, I would be a landscape architect right now. I would not be a therapist. Because I would have not found therapy that necessary, and I just would have pursued a different path. And I really like plants and being outside.
mm,
But I think because my childhood in many ways was really traumatic, I thought, well, if I can work this stuff through, at least to some degree, um, maybe I can help other people work some of their stuff through. And the more I worked my own stuff through, the better therapist I was because I knew the experience. And I also knew it was possible as an oral to work through a lot of that dependence, a lot of that physical lack of energy, a lot of that neediness that took me a long time as an oral to really work through with, a really good bioenergetic therapist.
mm,
And so um, I think, like you said, the trauma was a catalyst. The trauma pushed us. Um, Maybe without trauma, we would be very different people with very different lives, and who knows what those lives would be. But yeah, I like your point. I respect your point about trauma as a catalyst. Mm,
mm.
yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
I mean, I guess also because the world is so kind of, it often seems to me to be so kind of comfort driven these days. Everyone wants to be comfortable, and then of course most deep change involves not being particularly comfortable for quite a while.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, the people change a lot as well, I think, and each generation has changed quite a lot. Do you see the same kind of thing? They talk a lot, I know, in the States about the difference between like millennials, Generation Z, and the baby boomers who are our generation, and we've got a bit more of a drive and the kind of thing. And I don't know, like you're saying, the generations these days, do they have that? Will they just kind of not be too motivated to really be the best in life in some way, but just to kind of fit in with whatever social engineering is going on around them? I don't know.
Hmm. Um, well, I think for young LGBTQ people,
Mm-hmm,
it's a much better time.
mm-hmm,
I mean, just today, somebody on the National Hockey League came out at 19,
mm-hmm,
first person ever. Last week, somebody in the National Football League came out, first time forever for somebody on a team. So, if I had seen this when I was a teenager, I would have had a much easier life.
mm-hmm,
So, I'm really glad that their opportunities to be themselves are, it's a much wider, um, a much bigger playing field.
mm-hmm,
On the other hand, what I see personally and from nieces and nephews and clients is this is a hell of a disorienting time to grow up. Um, there's just not that much that's really stable. And so if you've never grown up with a lot of stability and everything's changing, where do you find your center? How do you get grounded? I
mm,
find younger people really need grounding,
mm,
especially bioenergetic grounding. I
mm,
mean, they're doing something, and I put my hands on their feet or my feet on their feet, and they just start jumping all over. They are
mm,
not used to being grounded. Um, Whereas people you know, that are more my age, we grew up in general in a much slower pace. So we had time to get used to things. And, there wasn't social media that was always telling us that, you're great or you're trash or, you're ugly or you're too fat. Um, we just had three channels of television. That was basically it. And if it wasn't there, then, it probably wasn't happening. So I see them as having advantages. What I notice in most of my women clients is this is really a great time to be a woman
Hmm.
because so many more things are possible. But if you're a woman who's looking for a man, it's not an easy time to find a man who's going to meet all your criteria.
Hmm.
It's like that Esther Perel, she's a fabulous couples counselor.
Okay.
She's Swiss, and she says, we all want Clark Kent at tax time and Superman in bed.
Mm. Mm.
So if you're a young man nowadays, how assertive, how masculine are you supposed to be? I have clients who are a young couple, both self-employed, and the woman got pregnant, and she said to the husband, "Are you going to be able to support us?" And he said, "I don't know. Like you make half the income." And they got really angry at each other and she started saying, "Well, you're not really a man. You have to take care of your family." And he said, "Well, you're not really a woman because you're so aggressive and you're just making me feel so bad about myself." And I was like, "Oh, this is not the best of the new age. You know, this was not." Um, so they both were sort of trapped with not knowing, well, how do we find what really grounds us and makes us feel solid and makes us feel safe? And like they say in bioenergetics, how do we find what makes us feel alive? Just feeling alive in this world is pretty challenging to just feel alive like, hi, I'm Deb and I feel alive and I feel I have vitality and I have energy and I'm really curious and I just have all this energy to just be alive. I don't think that's easy for anybody. It's not easy for me.
Yeah. I mean, I guess how I see it. I mean, I totally see what you're saying, and I've had a lot of the same experiences around. And also, it's like it's such a rapidly changing mental landscape now, in a sense
Yes.
that that's
Yeah.
also an invitation to feel your body more. Because, and I was making some videos about this for my channel when COVID was hitting, and everyone was kind of freaking out a year ago, and there's all conspiracy and vaccine stories and all these different stories, and people are just being blown all over the place mentally, and it's like that's also an invitation to feel the circuit from your belly to the soles of your feet, because in that you can rely on that, you can rely. And if you have that, then you can be hurled around the place, but you're not totally hurled around the place. Your mind is being hurled around the place, but you are still present on a deep kind of psychical level, deep kind of psychological level, and that's what I was kind of teaching more of during the initial stages of COVID, because I could see the value in it for myself and for others, not to be so reliant on the mind, not to be so, and even for like, okay, there's the case of a young guy, like you're saying, who, you know, that if they're fundamentally going through life trying to please, then probably, trying to please women is not a good move, because
Trying to please anyone is probably not a good
but
strategy.
that, but that, but the woman, of course, in a situation like the ones you're describing, is shining a light on the guy. Not, she's not saying you're just a pleaser, but in his efforts to do the right thing, he's overlooking who he is and
Mm,
what's his authentic position. Because my experience of women was like around the Osho scene, the women were very powerful. It was a matriarchy, probably one of the few matriarchies of the last a couple of thousand years, and so it was Osho was at the top, but the rest was all women. It was a female power pyramid, and so
mm,
you had a lot of strong women,
hmm
and And what the women are doing, they're just pounding the men. They're pounding the men with their natural irrationality and passion and change, and constant change. And it's
Mm,
good for the men as long as they can stay the course, because
hmm
then they at some point come to a place where they really are grounded and they can kind of hold the woman in that kind of crazy movement. So that was the crazy movement in the sense of them constantly changing attitude and having a lot of energy with that as well, pounding energy out of the men. So that was kind of a healthy process. But
yeah.
that was a little bit articulated in the Osho scene. Of course, for the average young man trying to get in a relationship, they have no framework like that to refer to. It's more like, because it can be kind of handy just to have a little bit of a framework. Okay, I'm being pounded by the women and they're throwing me emotionally all over the place. But that is a healing journey as well. I need to stick with it.
Mm. I like what you said about the grounding from the feet up to the belly.
Mm,
Um, and I would, in bioenergetics, I would, keep bringing it up all
mm,
the way to the
mm,
top of the head and out
mm-hmm,
the arms and fingers. But just to feel grounded, you know, one of the things I loved about the work when I first heard it was, you know, if you have too much energy, like me, if you're anxious, it will ground you. It will help you pull that energy in a constructive way.
mm-hmm,
If you have too little energy and you're really sort of tired and, kind of dragging yourself through life, it will give you more energy. It will give you more grounded energy. And sorry, I love how bioenergetics helps balance the available energy at any given point in time. For me, that was so helpful as a client and really helpful as a therapist. Because if someone's depressed and really sort of dragging, their vitality needs to be strengthened. And if they just have like too much energy and they're just sort of hyper and they're just like really up here in their head and blah 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 blah, then to pull it in and to ground
mm,
and to have that energy be embodied, not just sort of kind of thrown all over the place in a haphazard way.
mm,
So I liked your point about grounding through the feet up through the belly. And
mm,
I would just say, let's take it even further. Let's take it all the way
mm-hmm,
so that therapy is not just from the top of the head to the
mm,
bottom of the face. It goes
mm,
all the way into the earth and then when we're grounded, so much more is possible no matter what your theoretical framework is, whether you're following Osho or internal family systems or yoga or bioenergetics. It all just works so much better.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm, mm, nice.
So good point. Thank you.
Mm.
Mm,
I was going to ask, because I thought you being a gay man and a therapist, I was kind of intrigued a bit because I also get a lot of gay men and women kind of coming towards my work personally,
mm,
and something that kind of impressed me or intrigued me about it was that I haven't studied Lowen and Reich extensively, but certainly with Lowen there is some anti-gay sentiment in there as I saw it. In some of his writings it seemed quite
mm,
overtly so, and I just and I know a lot of the kind of with the cancel culture these days, a lot of people would probably be against that, and yet at the same time, I see a lot of gay men, and in particular, very, very interested in body work and
yeah.
in bioenergetics and Reichian work. I just wondered if you had any kind of opinions about all of that.
Mm. Well, I haven't read Lowen for about 15 years. So my memories of Lowen, I don't recall um, any homophobic stuff. It
Mm,
might have been there, but I might just not remember it.
mm,
Um, I don't remember being triggered by it.
mm,
Um, in San Diego, where I live, there's a very strong bioenergetic society. And one of the guys who was in the group Bob French, was that his name? His last name was French. He was a gay man, and he was very keen on bringing bioenergetic theory into the gay community. And he wrote a lot of really interesting papers and articles. And he came before me. Unfortunately, he died of AIDS before I became involved in bioenergetics. But I read his work and I just thought, oh yeah, he gets it. Um, Two of the people I've studied with a lot here in California are Bob and Virginia Hilton. They sort of took Lowen's work and brought it into a more collaborative state. And their work is very LGBTQ friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there have been papers that have been written about bioenergetics from a queer perspective, a queer point of view.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in school, I read all this stuff really diligently. I don't read it that much anymore, Dev, to be honest, but I do remember that there was a real effort made to apply it to all communities, including the LGBT community, but
Mm-hmm.
also communities of color, minority communities, where before it was really more of a cis heterosexual white um, thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so that's changing, consciously changing.
Mm.
Um, I hope that answers your question. I'm a little rusty on what Reich and Lowen said about same sex relationships. I'm not a good source, sorry.
No, fair enough. Fair enough. I think there was one book I read, and my girlfriend read it as well, and she was like, "Whoa, this is like really depression in the body." Maybe the second part of depression in the body, but I can't quite remember. Maybe someone, if they see this, will remember it.
Mm,
But it just kind of intrigued me because I certainly, from my client base, a lot of gay people were really interested in bio and unraveling themselves through the body. So it's like it's like a I just kind of I was intrigued by that.
I
Yeah.
guess I don't see bioenergetics as any better for gay or straight people or any worse for gay or straight people. It just doesn't seem to have gender barriers or uh, as a therapist now of about 10 years, I just don't see any difference. I mean, the principles work regardless of your age, sex, race, nationality, um, gender identity.
Yeah.
Um, they work, at least as a therapist to me. I've had clients that self-identify as non-binary. I've had male to female transgender clients, female to male transgender clients. Uh, Bioenergetics works with everybody.
Mm.
I've not ever had a client, oh gosh, too bad it doesn't work with this kind of person. You
Mm.
know,
Mm.
the kind of person it doesn't work with are the people who, after one session, they're like, well, I'm not doing this, I'm out of here. Probably the more rigid and narcissistic characters, they may not stick around for therapy. That may be the challenge there. I'm
Mm.
fine. I don't need therapy. I'm fine. Yeah, okay, great. Come back if I can ever help you. And if you're happy, then that's great. More power to you.
Yeah, they usually need a crisis, quite a major crisis. That's what I found. So to kind of to rock up in the group room, the, the
Well,
people
don't
strong.
most of us need a crisis to bring us to therapy? That's what brought me back to therapy when my sister died. I was like, okay, I don't want to do this just with my friends. I want a therapist again.
Hmm.
Um, I think I'd like to just thank a couple people who, in my bioenergetic past, were really crucial. Um, a guy named Mac Eaton, who has since died, was just the most gentle, smart, kind bioenergetic therapist I had met in years and years. He was such a great model. I'm getting a little choked up actually thinking about him. He was
Mm.
such a great model for me. And in our program here in San Diego, there were not many men. we had very few male trainers. And Mac was one of the male trainers, and he was so, so powerful. There was another male trainer who came from Texas, Chuck. I wish I could remember his name. He kept saying, "Look at the body, look at the body, look at the body." And I was so sick of him. I just wish he would shut up. I was like, I'm looking. And he would say, "But Michael, you're not seeing it. You're not seeing." And now, 10 years later, I'm like, Chuck, thank you. You were so right. I wasn't seeing. I wasn't, I was resistant. I wasn't able. I was afraid. And he was right. And then
Not
the people who really
Diederik.
met, sorry?
Not Chuck Diederik, was it?
No,
No.
Chuck from Texas. I can't remember his name. Shoot.
Sorry.
Anyway. And then the people who mentored me here, Diana Guest, Garrett Bedrosian, and Vincentia Schroeder, they were my main teachers, and I learned so much from them. And I was in supervision group with them, and they're just such wise women. I will always be grateful to them. I just wanted to mention them because without those people, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for agreeing to come along and chat. It's been lovely having a chat with
Pleasure,
you.
Dev. Pleasure. This has been great. Thank you for asking me such great questions.
Well, it's lovely to meet you, and I wish you a very beautiful day.
Thank you. Thank
you.
you, Dev. Should we leave or just turn off the video or what?
You can turn off the video a sec. Just have to
Okay.
stop this recording.